My name is Patricia Hartwell, and I'm 33 years old. Last week, I found a stack of court documents hidden in my parents' filing cabinet, guardianship papers. They'd already petitioned the court to make me legally and financially responsible for my adult brother without my knowledge, without my consent, so they could wash their hands of him. But the judge caught something. She demanded I appear in person. She wants to hear my side. And what I'm about to tell you is the truth they tried to bury under a judge's signature. You see, this isn't just one family's secret. Every year, courts across the country hand over control of $50 billion in assets to guardians, often with no background check, no hearing for the person being guardianized. My parents tried to add me to that system without ever telling me. They signed affidavits claiming I agreed. They listed my brother as totally incapacitated, he is. And now a judge wants to hear my voice before she lets it stand. But here's the hard truth. I wouldn't have known any of it if I hadn't opened that filing cabinet on a Saturday afternoon looking for a tax document. What I found inside wasn't just paperwork. It was a blueprint for how they planned to disappear. To understand why my own parents would try to erase me from the legal record, you have to understand Daniel. My brother is 31 years old. He has autism spectrum disorder level 2, and he's lived with our parents his entire life. He works part-time at a grocery store bagging groceries. He pays his own taxes. He has a girlfriend. He is not incapacitated. He is not unable to make decisions for himself, but he is dependent on a routine. And our parents, Frank and Ellen Hartwell, built their entire lives around that routine. I'm 3 years younger than Daniel. Growing up, our house ran on a schedule designed around his needs. Dinner at exactly 6. No loud visitors after 8. No rearranging the furniture. No spontaneous plans. I learned to be invisible early because visibility meant disruption. It wasn't that they didn't love me, they just had less bandwidth. I don't resent Daniel for that. He didn't choose any of it. But I did learn one lesson that stuck. My role was to accommodate, not to be accommodated. When I turned 18, I left for college, University of Vermont, 400 miles away. I studied accounting because it was practical and quiet. I graduated with honors, got a job at a regional firm in Burlington, rented an apartment with good light and no roommates. I built a small, orderly life. I called home every Sunday. I visited for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I sent birthday cards. I did what a good daughter does, even when being a good daughter meant never being the center of attention. 5 years ago, that started to change. Mom called me in February. Her voice had that tight, careful quality I recognized from childhood, the voice she used when she was about to ask for something she knew she shouldn't ask. "Patricia, your father and I are getting older. We need to talk about Daniel's future." I said what any sibling would say. Of course, let's talk. I assumed we'd discuss a trust fund, maybe a group home waitlist. I assumed we had years. I was wrong. Over the next 3 years, the conversations escalated. They wanted me to be Daniel's legal guardian after they couldn't care for him anymore. They wanted me to move back to Connecticut. They wanted me to give up my apartment, my job, my life in Burlington. Every time I pushed back, they used the same words: "He's your brother. Family takes care of family." I told them I'd be involved, I'd help manage his finances. I'd visit, I'd be his advocate, but I wasn't willing to become his full-time caregiver. I had a career, I had a life I had built, and Daniel didn't need a full-time caregiver. He needed support. He needed a system. He didn't need a sister who sacrificed everything to become a replacement parent. They didn't like that answer. They stopped asking. I thought they had accepted it. I thought they had found another plan. I didn't realize they had simply started building a plan that didn't include my consent. Here, something you need to understand about guardianship. In most states, you don't need the person's permission to file. You just need a doctor's letter and a judge's signature. The person being guardianized rarely gets a lawyer. They rarely get a hearing where anyone listens. And the person being named as guardian, sometimes they find out after it's already been approved. That Saturday afternoon, I was home for my father's 71st birthday. The house smelled like pot roast and resentment. I was looking for an old tax return in the filing cabinet in the den. I pulled out a folder labeled Daniel Legal. Inside, I found a petition for guardianship of an adult. My parents had already filled out every line. Name of proposed ward, Daniel Hartwell. Relationship, son. Proposed guardian, Patricia Hartwell. Relationship, sister. They had signed their names on the line marked petitioners. They had listed a doctor's evaluation dated 6 months earlier. That doctor, a man I've never met, wrote that Daniel was unable to make informed decisions about his medical care, finances, or residence. I know my brother, that evaluation is a lie. Daniel manages his own checking account. He budgets for his monthly expenses. He tells his doctor which medications work and which ones don't. The evaluation wasn't based on a real assessment. It was based on what my parents told that doctor over the phone. But the petition wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the affidavit attached to the back. It was signed by my parents, notarized, dated 2 weeks ago. In it, they swore under oath that I had been consulted, that I had given my verbal consent to serve as guardian, that I had agreed to assume full responsibility for Daniel's care and finances upon their death or incapacitation. Their signatures, their lies. My name used without my permission to commit what I later learned was fraud on the court. I sat in that den for 20 minutes holding that paper, the pot roast smell mixed with the smell of old ink. Upstairs, Daniel was watching a documentary about sharks. My father was napping in his recliner. My mother was humming in the kitchen. They had already filed the petition. They had already paid the filing fee. They had already decided that my life was theirs to rearrange. The only reason it hadn't gone through yet is that the judge assigned to the case, a woman named Roberta Shin, does something unusual. She requires in-person testimony from all proposed guardians before she signs off. She wanted to hear from me. My parents didn't expect that. They expected a rubber stamp. They expected a 60-second hearing where a clerk read the petition and the judge nodded and the paperwork got filed, and I never knew. But Judge Shin sent a notice, a hearing date, April 17th. My parents had hidden that notice in the same folder. They planned to show up without me. They planned to tell the judge I couldn't make it, that I'd sent a letter of consent. They brought the letter, too, forged, dated, and signed with a signature that looked nothing like mine. I took photos of every document. I put the originals back exactly where I found them. I went upstairs and hugged Daniel goodbye. I told my mother I had to get back to Burlington for a Monday meeting. She didn't ask why I looked pale. She didn't ask what I had found. She just said, "Drive safe, honey," and went back to her pot roast. I drove 3 hours before I pulled over and threw up on the side of the highway, not from sickness, from the cold recognition of what I was up against. They weren't going to ask. They had already taken. And the only thing standing between me and a court order that would chain me to my brother's care for the rest of my life was one judge who wanted to hear my voice. But here's what I didn't know yet. The petition was only the beginning. There was another document in that folder, one I almost missed, one that had a date from 18 months earlier. And when I finally understood what it meant, I realized my parents had been planning this long before I ever said no, long before they ever asked. I just hadn't read far enough down the stack. The document was dated 18 months before the petition. It was titled Pre-Need Designation of Guardian for an Adult. In Connecticut, where my parents live, this is a legal form you can fill out in advance. It names who you want to serve as guardian for your child if you become unable or unwilling to do it yourself. It's meant for parents of children with disabilities who want to plan ahead. But here's the critical detail I didn't know that Saturday afternoon. That document requires the proposed guardian's signature, my signature. I looked at the bottom of the form. There was a signature that looked like mine. Date, March 14th, 2 years ago. I had been in Burlington that entire week, working 30 hours of overtime for tax season. I had never signed anything for my parents on March 14th. I had never seen that form. They had signed my name, notarized by a neighbor who worked at a bank, and filed it with the probate court 18 months before they ever asked me about caring for Daniel. I called a lawyer the next morning, a woman named Rebecca Ose who specializes in elder law and guardianship. I found her through the Connecticut Bar Association referral line. Our first call lasted 87 minutes. I read her the key findings from my research, that 60% of courts don't review guardians' credit histories, that 40% don't run background checks, that the average guardianship case lasts 6 years and controls about $300 billion in assets nationally. She listened without interrupting. Then she said 3 words that changed everything: they're not unique. Rebecca told me that forged guardianship petitions are more common than people realize. Family members file them all the time to gain control over money, property, or caregiving obligations. Most of the time, judges approve them without asking questions. The person who gets guardianized often never appears in court. The proposed guardian often doesn't either. The system runs on paperwork and trust, she said, is exactly what gets exploited. Your parents knew they'd need your signature eventually, Rebecca said. They forged it early so that if you ever objected, they could claim you had already agreed. The pre-need form makes you look like a willing participant. The petition makes you look like you changed your mind. And the narrative they'll present to the judge is that you're abandoning your brother. I sat in my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, looking at the kitchen clock. It was 10:14 in the morning. I had a meeting at 11. I couldn't think about meetings. What do I do? I asked. First, you do not appear at that hearing without a lawyer. I'll send you a retainer agreement today. Second, you need to talk to Daniel directly, not your parents. Daniel, find out if he knows what they're doing. Third, you need to document everything you just told me. Every paper, every date, every phone call. I hung up and immediately called my brother. Daniel's phone went to voicemail. I texted, "Call me, it's urgent, don't tell mom and dad." 30 minutes later, he called back and his voice was confused. He said, "Pat, what's wrong? You never text." I told him I needed to see him alone. He agreed to meet me at a diner near his grocery store 2 days later on his day off. When I walked into that diner, Daniel was already sitting in a booth, drinking a chocolate milkshake the way he's done since he was 12 years old. He looked nervous. He always picks at the paper napkin when he's nervous. I sat down, ordered coffee I never drank, and told him about the documents. His face went through stages I can only describe as falling from one floor to another. First confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of hurt I've never seen in him before. "They filed papers to make you take care of me?" he asked slowly. "Oh yes, without asking you." "Oh yes, without asking me." I shook my head. He stared at his milkshake for a long time. His hands were shaking. Daniel's hands don't shake unless he's really upset. They didn't tell me anything, he said finally. They said you were coming home to help with taxes. They said the hearing was about something else. They told me not to worry. Here's the thing about Daniel that my parents have never understood. He is not incapable of understanding difficult realities. He just processes them differently. He needs time. He needs quiet. He needs someone to be honest with him instead of arranging his life like a set of shelves he can't see. What do you want? I asked him. He looked up at me. I want to live my life. I don't want to be a problem. You're not a problem. Then why are they treating me like one? I didn't have an answer, not one that would help. That night I called Rebecca again. She told me something even more unsettling. In Connecticut, if a guardianship petition is filed and the proposed ward does not contest it, the court can approve it without a full hearing. Daniel could be declared incapacitated without ever speaking to a judge. He could lose the right to decide where he lives, how he spends his money, what medical treatments he receives. And once that order is signed, it is very hard to reverse. Some people spend years trying to get their rights back, some never do. Your parents are not just trying to make you the guardian, Rebecca said. They're trying to make Daniel a ward. They're trying to have him declared legally incompetent so that you have no choice but to take over. And if you refuse after the order is signed, you could be held in contempt of court. I started researching harder. I found the National Association to Stop Guardianship Abuse. I read case after case. A woman in Nevada whose brother was placed under guardianship and had his house sold without his knowledge. A man in Florida whose daughter filed a guardianship petition after he refused to co-sign a loan. A family in Oklahoma where a professional guardian stole $11 million from dozens of wards before anyone noticed. Over 2 million Americans are under some form of guardianship right now. Most of them never had a chance to speak. I thought about Daniel, about his apartment with his vintage movie posters, about his job where he knows every regular customer by name, about his girlfriend Maria who works at the library and calls him every night, about the fact that he has never missed a rent payment in 8 years. I thought about what it would mean for him to have a judge stamp incapacitated on his life. I thought about what it would mean for me to have a court order demanding I become his keeper. Then I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make. I decided to fight the petition, not as a victim of my parents' manipulation, not as a daughter protecting her own life, but as a sister who saw what was about to happen to her brother and refused to let it. Rebecca filed a formal objection with the probate court. I wrote an affidavit describing everything. The forged signatures, the hidden documents, the phone calls I never made, the consent I never gave. I included Daniel's own statement, written in his own hand, saying he did not want a guardian and that he was capable of managing his own affairs with support. The hearing date was moved to May 2nd. Both sides would be allowed to present evidence, and my parents were told they would need to testify under oath about the documents they had signed. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, the entire dynamic in my family has shifted from omission to open warfare. My mother left 7 voicemails in 2 days, alternating between crying and accusing. My father called my boss in Burlington to warn him about me. My Aunt Christine, who has always been neutral, stopped taking my calls. And Daniel, caught in the middle, started having panic attacks for the first time in his life. But here's what they don't know. The same week I filed my objection, I hired a private investigator to look into my parents' finances. I wanted to know why they were so desperate to transfer responsibility so abruptly. I found something I didn't expect. Something that made the forged documents and the hidden petition look like the first chapters of a much darker story. They had taken out a second mortgage on the house 6 months ago. They had been liquidating Daniel's modest savings account over the last year slowly, in small amounts that wouldn't trigger bank alerts. And they had recently applied for Medicaid for Daniel, listing themselves as his legal representatives, even though they had no legal authority to do so. Which means they were not just trying to hand me a problem. They were trying to hand me an empty bank account, a house about to default, and a brother whose disability benefits they had been restructuring in their own name. And the guardianship they filed wasn't about Daniel's well-being. It was about getting out from under a financial collapse they had engineered while using my name to drive the getaway car. The private investigator's report landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. 47 pages. I read it in my car, parked outside my apartment, engine running because I couldn't wait to get inside. What I found made me call Rebecca immediately, and what she told me made me realize that my parents were not just desperate. They were in deeper trouble than I had imagined possible. The second mortgage was for $120,000. Most of it was gone within 60 days, not to medical bills, not to home repairs, to credit card debt my parents had been accumulating for years, debt they had hidden from me, from Daniel, from every relative who might ask. My father had lost his manufacturing job 18 months ago. He hadn't told anyone. He'd been drawing from retirement accounts, then from credit cards, then from the house. By the time I found the guardianship papers, they had less than $3,000 in liquid assets. But here's the part that changed everything. The Medicaid application for Daniel listed assets that included his savings account, but that account had been drained by my parents over the previous 12 months. 18 withdrawals, each under $500, structured to avoid automatic reporting thresholds. They had moved the money into an account in their own name. And they had listed Daniel as a dependent on their tax returns for the last 3 years, claiming the disability tax credit even though they no longer legally supported him. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment after I read her those numbers. Then she said, "Patricia, what they've done isn't just fraud against you, it's fraud against the state. They've misrepresented Daniel's financial situation to qualify for public benefits. They've structured withdrawals to avoid detection. And they've used your forged signature to create the appearance that you were part of the planning. This is not a family dispute anymore. This is a criminal matter." I sat in my car, the engine still running, the heater blowing warm air I didn't feel. Do I report them? "That's not a legal question," Rebecca said. "That's a personal one, but if you don't and someone else finds out, a bank auditor, a Medicaid investigator, a judge who gets curious about those withdrawal patterns, you become complicit by silence. The forged signature on the pre-need form puts you in the frame. You need to decide which side of that line you want to be on." I didn't sleep that night. I called Daniel at 11 o'clock. He answered, which meant he was anxious too. He never stays up past 10. "Daniel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without panicking." "I'm already panicking," he said, "just tell me." I told him about the money, about the second mortgage, about the Medicaid application, about what Rebecca said. He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "They took my money?" he finally asked. His voice was small, not angry, just hurt, like a child who found out Santa Claus doesn't exist. "Oh yes. The money I saved from the grocery store, the money for my apartment, for emergencies." "Yes, Daniel. I trusted them." I didn't know what to say to that, because I had trusted them too, and that trust had been used to build a legal trap with my name on it. The next day, I did something I never thought I would do. I called Adult Protective Services in Connecticut and filed a report of financial exploitation, not against a stranger, against my parents. I gave them the withdrawal records. I gave them the mortgage documents. I gave them the Medicaid application with the false asset disclosures. I told the intake worker that my brother was at risk of having his disability benefits and housing destabilized by people who were supposed to protect him. She asked me if I had evidence. I said yes. She asked me if I was willing to testify. I said yes. Then she asked me something that stopped me cold. "Are you prepared for the possibility that your parents may face criminal charges?" I told her I was. I wasn't sure if I meant it, but I said it. That same week, Daniel made a decision of his own. Without telling me, without telling our parents, he went to the probate court clerk's office and asked for a copy of the guardianship petition. He filled out a form to have himself added as an interested party. He requested a court-appointed attorney, and he wrote a letter to Judge Shin in his own handwriting explaining that he did not want a guardian and that he was capable of making his own decisions. When I found out, I drove to his apartment and hugged him so hard he said, "Pat, you're crushing my ribs." I let go, but I didn't stop shaking. "How did you know to do that?" I asked. "I Googled it," he said. "Then I called the clerk. She explained it. I'm not stupid, Pat. I just process slow." I started crying, not the dramatic kind, the relieved kind, because for years everyone had treated Daniel like he couldn't understand his own life, and here he was taking the most important legal step of his existence without anyone's help. The hearing was now 12 days away, and the pressure was building from directions I hadn't anticipated. My Aunt Christine called me not to yell this time, but to warn me. She said my mother had been talking to a family friend who was a retired probate judge. He told her that if the guardianship failed, they could pursue a conservatorship instead, which gives the conservator control over finances without needing to prove full incapacity. A different standard, a different process. A different door they could open. "Your mother isn't going to stop," Christine said. "She's terrified of what happens if she can't control this. And your father is following orders because he doesn't know what else to do. They see this as survival, Patricia, and people who think they're surviving will do almost anything." I realized then that even if I won the hearing, the battle wouldn't be over. They could file again. They could try a different legal theory. They could keep coming until a judge finally said no so many times that they ran out of options, or until they found a judge who said yes. Meanwhile, something was shifting in Daniel. The quiet, accommodating brother I had known my entire life was becoming someone different. He started asking questions. Why did mom and dad never teach me how to do my own taxes? Why did they tell me not to open mail from the bank? Why did they say I couldn't live alone even though I've lived alone for 6 years without any problems? I didn't have comforting answers, because the honest answer was that my parents had systematically limited his independence so that he would always need them. And when they couldn't be what he needed anymore, they tried to transfer that dependency to me. The week before the hearing, I drove to Hartford to meet with Rebecca in person. We sat in her office, which was lined with books about probate law and elder rights. She reviewed Daniel's letter to Judge Shin and nodded approvingly. "This is good," she said, "but I need to prepare you for what's going to happen in that courtroom. Your parents are going to say they did everything out of love. They're going to say they were trying to protect Daniel. They're going to say you live too far away to understand his needs. And they're going to paint you as the daughter who abandoned her brother." "They forged my signature," I said. "I know, and we have evidence, but the judge is going to want to know why they felt they had to do that. And their answer is going to be that you refused to help, that you left them with no options, that they were desperate. The question is whether the judge believes desperation justifies fraud." She leaned forward. "I think Judge Shin will rule in our favor. She has a reputation for being thorough and protective of the rights of proposed wards. But even if we win, the relationship with your parents may not survive. Are you prepared for that?" I looked out the window at the Hartford skyline, gray and indifferent. "They already ended it," I said. "They just didn't tell me." 2 days before the hearing, I got a call from Daniel. His voice was different, steadier. "Pat, I decided something," he said. "What?" "I'm going to testify. I want the judge to hear it from me." "Daniel, you don't have to. I can speak for both of us." "I know, but it's my life. If someone going to say I can't make my own decisions, they should have to say it to my face." I sat down on my kitchen floor. My brother, who my parents had described as unable to make informed decisions, had just articulated the most fundamental principle of self-advocacy I had ever heard. "I'll be right next to you," I said. "I know," he said, "that's why I can do it." The morning of May 2nd, I woke up at 4:30. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sit still. I drove to Daniel's apartment and we drove to the courthouse together. He wore a button-down shirt and his best jeans. I wore a navy blazer I had bought for a work conference years ago. We looked like we were going to a job interview or a funeral. It turned out to be both. The courtroom was small, fluorescent lights, wooden benches, a single American flag in the corner. My parents were already there, sitting on the opposite side of the aisle. My mother was clutching a tissue. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. They didn't look at me. They didn't look at Daniel. Judge Shin entered at 9 o'clock sharp. She was in her late 50s, silver hair, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked at the room like she had seen every version of this story before, and she probably had. She called the case, she reviewed the petition, then she looked at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, I have reviewed your filing, and I have also reviewed the objection filed by Ms. Hartwell and the letter submitted by Daniel Hartwell himself. I have a number of questions before I proceed. Let's start with the pre-need designation form. The signature of the proposed guardian appears to be dated March 14th, 2 years ago. Ms. Hartwell, can you tell me where you were on that date?" I stood up. "Your Honor, I was in Burlington, Vermont. I was working overtime for tax season. I can provide time cards, emails, and bank records that confirm my presence there." Judge Shin looked at my parents. "Do you have any evidence that Ms. Hartwell was present for the signing of this document?" My mother started crying. My father said, "We don't recall the exact date, Your Honor. We may have backdated it." "Backdated it," Judge Shin repeated. "You're telling this court that you signed your daughter's name to a legal document, notarized it, and filed it without her knowledge or presence." "We were trying to protect our son," my father said. Judge Shin set down her pen. She took off her reading glasses, and she said something that I will never forget. "The law does not authorize you to commit fraud in order to protect anyone, and what you have described to me is fraud." The room went quiet. My mother stopped crying. My father's hands were shaking, and on the bench, Judge Shin opened Daniel's letter and began to read it aloud. "Dear Judge Shin, my name is Daniel Hartwell. I am 31 years old. I work at a grocery store. I live in my own apartment. I pay my bills. I have a girlfriend. I am not sick. I am not unable to make decisions. My parents are trying to take away my rights, and my sister is trying to help me keep them. Please don't let them make me a ward. I want to live my life." She looked up. "Mr. Hartwell, did you write this?" Daniel stood up. I watched him take a breath. I watched him square his shoulders. And I watched my brother, who had been treated like a burden his entire life, speak directly to a judge with a voice that did not waver. "Yes, Your Honor, I wrote every word." Judge Shin sat in silence for a long moment after Daniel finished speaking. She looked at the letter in her hands, then at Daniel, then at my parents. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, deliberate, the kind of voice that had delivered many verdicts and knew the weight of each one. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, I am denying your petition for guardianship. I am also referring this matter to the Connecticut Probate Court's investigative unit for review of the forged signatures and the irregularities in the pre-need designation. The court will also be filing a report with Adult Protective Services regarding the financial transactions involving Mr. Hartwell's savings account. This hearing is adjourned." My mother let out a sound that was not quite a word. My father sat frozen, his hands gripping the bench in front of him. A court officer approached them and said something in a low voice. They stood slowly like people who had just learned that the ground beneath them was no longer solid. They walked out without looking back. I did not watch them leave. Daniel sat down beside me. His hands were trembling, but his face was calm. He looked at me and said, "Did that just happen?" "Yes," I said, "that just happened." We walked out of the courthouse into sunlight that felt too bright for the morning. Daniel stopped on the steps and took a long breath. I stood next to him, not saying anything. There are moments that don't need words. This was one of them. The aftermath was not immediate. It unfolded in pieces over the following weeks. Adult Protective Services opened an investigation into the financial exploitation. The probate court's investigative unit began its review of the forged documents. My parents were contacted by a state attorney who asked them to provide all records related to Daniel's savings account and the Medicaid application. They hired a lawyer. The lawyer called Rebecca. Rebecca called me. "They want to settle," she said. "They're willing to sign an agreement never to file another guardianship or conservatorship petition against Daniel. They're willing to repay the money they took from his account, and they're willing to undergo a mental health evaluation as part of the family court proceedings." What do they want in returns? They want you to decline to press criminal charges, and they want Daniel to agree not to sue them civilly. I told Rebecca I needed to talk to Daniel. We met at the same diner where I had first told him about the documents. He ordered his usual chocolate milkshake. I ordered coffee, and this time I drank it. "They want us to let them off," I said. "I know. What do you think?" He stirred his milkshake slowly. "They're still my parents, Pat. They did something terrible, but they're still my parents. I don't want them to go to jail. I want them to leave me alone. I want my money back, and I want them to understand what they did." I nodded. "Then that's what we'll ask for." We signed the settlement agreement 2 weeks later. My parents were paid $43,000 to Daniel's account. They signed a binding agreement never to seek guardianship or conservatorship over him again. They agreed to attend 8 sessions of family therapy with a counselor of Daniel's choosing. And the state attorney agreed to close the criminal investigation without filing charges, provided there were no further violations. The therapy sessions were painful. The first one, Daniel asked me to come with him. We sat in a small room with a therapist named Dr. Anya, who specialized in family systems and disability rights. My parents sat on the other side of the circle, looking like people who had been hollowed out and left in the sun. My mother spoke first. "We thought we were doing what was best." "For who?" Daniel asked quietly. She didn't answer. My father said, "We were scared. We didn't know how to handle everything. The job loss, the debt, the future. We made terrible choices." "You forged my signature," I said. "You took Daniel's money. You filed legal papers that could have taken away his rights forever. That's not a terrible choice. That's a series of terrible choices that you made over 18 months. Dr. Andya steered the conversation away from blame and toward accountability. By the end of the session, my parents had agreed to meet with a financial planner to restructure their debt. They had agreed to give Daniel full control of his bank account with no joint signers, and they had agreed to stop discussing the guardianship with any family members. But the most important moment came at the end of the 3rd session. Daniel, who had been quiet for most of the hour, looked at our parents and said, "I forgive you, but I don't trust you. And trust is something you have to earn. I don't know if you can, but I'm willing to give you the chance to try." My mother started crying, not the manipulative kind I had seen in the courtroom, the real kind, the kind that comes from a place you didn't know was broken. I did not forgive them, not yet. Forgiveness, I had learned, is not a switch you flip. It's a door you open slowly and only when you're ready. I wasn't ready. But I was no longer standing in the way of Daniel making his own choices, and that, I realized, was the most important thing I could give him. 2 months after the hearing, something unexpected happened. Daniel called me and said he had been promoted at the grocery store. He was now a department lead in the produce section. He had his own name tag with a title. He sent me a photo. He was grinning, holding a head of lettuce like a trophy. "I'm making $22 an hour now," he said. "I'm going to start saving for a car." "That's amazing, Daniel." "It is," he said. "I never thought I could do any of this. They told me I couldn't." He didn't have to say who they were. The final surprising detail came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from the probate court. It was not about my parents. It was about Judge Shin. She had retired, and in her retirement, she had written a white paper on guardianship reform in Connecticut. In it, she cited 3 cases as examples of systemic abuse. One of them was anonymized, but I recognized the details. My family's story. She wrote about the forged pre-need designation. She wrote about the financial exploitation. She wrote about the brother who spoke for himself in court. And she wrote that the system needed to change so that no one else would have to fight as hard as we did just to keep their rights. I keep a copy of that white paper in my desk drawer. Next to it, I keep Daniel's letter to Judge Shin, two documents, one that tried to take everything from us and one that helped us keep it. My parents finished their 8 therapy sessions. They are no longer the people they were, but they are also not entirely new people. Change at their age is slow, partial, uneven. My father found a part-time job at a hardware store. My mother volunteers at a library. They call Daniel every Sunday. He answers when he wants to. Sometimes he lets it go to voicemail. That is his choice now. I still live in Burlington, I still work as an accountant, but I visit Connecticut more often, not for my parents, for Daniel. We have dinner once a month. He tells me about his job, his girlfriend, his plans. He asked me last week if I would help him set up a retirement account. I said yes. I helped him fill out the forms. He signed his own name, no one else. Last Sunday, I was sitting on my porch in Burlington, drinking tea, watching the light fade. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel, a photo of his apartment. On his coffee table, he had placed two framed pictures. One was of our grandparents who had always believed in him. The other was a photo of us from the diner taken by the waitress on the day I told him about the documents. We both looked scared. We both looked determined. And we both looked like people who were about to fight for something that mattered. Under the photo, he had typed, "Thanks for not giving up on me." I typed back, "Thanks for not giving up on yourselves." The phone went quiet, the porch was warm, and I realized that the guardianship petition, the forged signatures, the courtroom, the settlement, none of it was the end of the story. The end of the story was this: two siblings, 33 and 31, learning that family is not something you inherit, it's something you build, sometimes out of nothing, sometimes out of the wreckage of what came before, and sometimes it takes a judge, a letter, and a brother brave enough to speak his own truth. My name is Patricia Hartwell. I am 33 years old. I am no longer someone's pawn. I am someone's sister, and that is more than enough. My story doesn't end with a courtroom victory. It ends with a question that lingers long after the judge's gavel falls. How many other families are silently navigating this same darkness, never finding their way to a hearing, never having their voices heard by a judge who truly listens? The guardianship system in America was designed to protect the most vulnerable among us. But when oversight fails, when background checks are skipped, when courts operate on trust instead of verification, that same system becomes a weapon, a legal tool for control disguised as care. My parents believed they were doing what was right. They believed their fear justified their fraud. And they nearly succeeded in erasing both my brother's autonomy and my own future, all with the blessing of a signature they forged on a piece of paper no one bothered to verify. Daniel and I rebuilt our relationship, not on the foundation of what our parents wanted, but on the foundation of what we chose. He still calls me every week. He still sends me photos of his produce displays. And last month, he opened a joint savings account with his girlfriend, Maria. His name, his decision, no one else's signature required. But I think about the people who never get that chance, the ones who don't have a sister who finds the documents, the ones who don't have a lawyer who knows the loopholes, the ones whose parents or guardians or even strangers file petitions that slip through a system moving too fast to catch the lies. I think about the 2 million Americans currently under guardianship and how many of them never spoke to a judge, never wrote a letter, never had anyone fight for them. If you're watching this and something feels familiar, if you're the sibling being asked to carry a burden you never agreed to, or the parent feeling trapped by a system that offers no roadmap, know that you are not alone. And know that the first step is always the hardest: saying out loud what is really happening. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe. Not for me, for the stories that still need to be told. Drop a comment with the word clarity if you believe that the truth, no matter how long it takes, deserves to be heard, and I'll see you in the next one. My name is Patricia Hartwell, and I am finally fully the author of my own life.